So far in the series we've been talking about individual helping skills and working with individuals. Now I'd like to focus on the support group and group experiences and how we can make support groups work more effectively. We know something about this. We also know from our research that it's essential that we have support group experiences and offer that as part of the caring and helping that we're providing for people who are grieving. Also, that it's important for us as helpers to have an opportunity to meet with other helpers who are doing the work and to be able to share our experiences. I want to give a little background from psychology and research on social support and health, which supports this idea. And the basic finding is we know that friends can be good medicine. We know that social support is one of the best buffers against stress. That when we are in stress, we need to have social support. We need people telling us that they care for us. We need people giving us information, ideas on how we can cope more effectively. We need people telling us, well, I can give you a ride to the church. I can help you in this other way. We need all these different kinds of social support. Social support takes many different forms. And it's important that we get that when we are in stress. When we're dealing with very traumatic experiences like grief, it's particularly important. And what happens for helpers is that when we have a group context that we can go into with other people who are doing the same work, it's magical. We have a situation where if we create an environment in which people can talk about their innermost experiences in a safe way, where we can develop enough trust in the group, and this is true for helper groups and for groups of grieving people and people with cancer and other kinds of life crises, then something very special can happen, which is that I can disclose my distress and I can receive that kind of instant empathy that's only available from somebody else who's had a similar experience or who knows what I'm talking about. Emerson wrote, "The secrets of life are not shown except to sympathy and likeness." And what we have very frequently for us as helpers, for example, is you might come back to the church or to the hospice and you just had an awful time. You feel very inadequate. You feel like you weren't very successful working with this person, and you're kind of doubting yourself and feeling like, oh boy, I guess I'm not cut out for this. I feel awful. And you look around, and darn it, everybody looks neat and cheerful and efficient and happy and composed, and they all look very competent, and you're feeling so rotten. And at that point, you can start to make attributions to oneself and say, it must be something about me. Now, the real truth is that if we all sit down and begin talking to each other, we discover that other people in the group have had similar experiences, that they've had some of the same feelings, some of the same difficulties. We overcome this fallacy of uniqueness, the belief that I alone am having a difficult time, and we prevent an attribution to ourselves. So we don't make this characterological attribution. Instead, we think about, well, what is it that's so stressful about this? Oh yeah, other people have had this experience. I can normalize it. This is a lot, too, what's happening in groups for grieving individuals. They can start to say, oh yeah, other people have thrown pots and pans across the kitchen. Other people have felt like they couldn't go on. It's not just me. So this is a very important aspect of being in a group with sympathetic others. What are support groups and how do they help? Well, first I want to say that support groups are not psychotherapy groups, although they can have a therapeutic benefit for the people in the groups. They're different in that they're really helping normal people cope with the abnormal stresses often associated with difficult life circumstances, and that's an important point. And I think they're not as insight-oriented as psychotherapy groups either. But what they are is that they are collections of people meeting together who have a shared common concern or problem, whether it's a health crisis like cancer or a life crisis like bereavement or divorce or some other difficult experience. And the emotional distress of members is not due to mental illness, as somebody who's wont to describe things that way might say. Instead, it's normal people dealing with abnormal stressors. And what happens in the group is that you have a sharing of experiences as the driving force. That's the key element that's occurring. The groups work by group members benefiting from helping each other. There's a kind of a helper therapy principle involved here. We have benefits of helping that I've talked about earlier in the series, that you get something from helping each other. So by giving, I am receiving. Members provide models for imitation in coping with problems. So you see that, oh, I had this same situation, I dealt with it this way. You say, I might try that, and you just pick up that coping strategy. Also, members instill hope. By being with others who have survived similar experiences, we gain hope. We say, I can do it. This person has done it, I can do it. There's also an opportunity for catharsis and ventilation of feelings, for expressing these very troubling experiences to a group that can listen. And this is very important as part of our coping process. And something I've already mentioned, which is there's an opportunity to normalize one's feelings and to overcome this fallacy of uniqueness. Now, whether you're organizing a support group for helpers or for people dealing with a common life concern, there are certain ground rules that can improve the effectiveness of your group.
Dale, I'm organizing a support group, and I'd like to know if you could give me some ideas on the basic format for the group. Do you feel it should include discussion alone, or do you think it should also have an educational component?
I like both options. I think discussion alone can get a lot done, but also if you have a need for some educational kinds of information from outside, for example, you're considering a helper support group and developing that, well, maybe you could have someone come in and do a program on stressors that helpers experience, or mental health issues, alcoholism, working with suicidality, other things. So it's nice to have that kind of combination when you can.
How large do you feel the support group should be?
The magic number, 8 to 12, but if you're working with children and the elderly and they're the population that you're offering the support group to, I'd say a little bit smaller, 5 to 8.
And the frequency of the meetings?
I like every week. If the group can't meet every week, every other week, maybe an hour and a half. There are no fixed magical numbers here, but in my experience, hour-and-a-half meetings seem to be a lot more effective than hour meetings, and I would like to have them every week, but if some groups can't meet every week.
And what about the membership of the group? Do you feel it should be an open membership or a closed membership?
If it's a population, for example, a support group with cancer patients, then you have a lot of pressing needs and people need to be admitted and you can't have them in a queue waiting to get into the group, so then an open group is appropriate. But with a helper support group, I think a closed group, with it being opened intermittently, maybe every 12 weeks or every 6 months, if your group goes on for a long period of time, for new membership, because there will be attrition.
Do you feel the leadership of the group, one person leading it, or do you think a couple of people could rotate, or what comments do you have on that?
I think if I had to choose, I would pick a single facilitator model. But co-facilitation can work, especially if you have, for example, an educational component and the other facilitator is an educational resource person, because then you bring together those different kinds of expertise. If the co-facilitators are of different status in the organization, that can sometimes lead to problems because you have power struggles and other things happening. So the group could also be self-led, but there you would have to have a lot of input and a lot of structure from some training program and support groups.
And what about the physical arrangements for where the group would meet, and what comments would you have about that? Someplace
comfortable. I think avoid everyone sitting around a table. Instead, have everyone sitting with nothing between them and make sure everybody can see everyone else's face. The other thing I'd add is bring a snack. So I like to have a rotating responsibility for bringing something to munch on, because it's kind of nice to make the group physically as well as psychologically and spiritually nourishing.
Great. Thanks for your help.
Sure. What are some ideas for making support groups work effectively? First, I'd like to discuss some guidelines for individual members. These are things that members of groups can keep in mind while they're actually participating in the group. First is that everyone who is here belongs here. We're all members of the group. We all belong. What is true for each person is determined by that person. Each person is the authority on their own experience. Make contact, then address specific needs. Have your major focus be, I'm going to make contact with the other members of the group, and then start talking about what they need. Let others know what your ideas are. The idea here is to share. your experiences and what you've found has worked. Don't do all the talking. Monopolization in the group is one of the biggest problems. Research has shown that that can really impair effectiveness of a group. Help other members participate. Have that be a conscious goal. I'm going to facilitate other people interacting and contributing to the group. And listen carefully to these other members when they do speak. Inquire, but don't ask too many questions or give quick advice. This kind of crosstalk and asking questions and giving advice prematurely can make the group a less safe place to be. Disclose your own experiences, especially those that convey empathy for the experiences of other group members. And finally, and this deserves special attention, maintain confidentiality. And the rule of thumb I have is no news is good news. In other words, if someone shares something in the group, no one outside the group hears that. You can talk in general ways about the group and what was discussed. For example, someone talked about their sister and their situation at home. But you never say, Sally talked about her sister Mary and their situation at home. So we never link up these incidents with specific members of the group. It's essential to have a rule of confidentiality, to have a group in which we have trust and open communication. Let's turn our attention from guidelines for support group members to guidelines for facilitators of support groups. And here I want to go back for a moment to when we were talking about individual helping skills and strategies, when I suggested that we try to be non-directive with regard to content, but directive with regard to process. That's basically the same kind of strategy we want to have as a facilitator of a support group. The idea is that we should exercise the least amount of authority necessary to promote beneficial, helpful interaction in the group, and thereby maximize the autonomy of members. They have to do it themselves. And if we create a belief that the facilitator is going to solve members' problems, that can be disastrous for the group. So I have some general recommendations. On the don't side, don't dominate, don't sermonize, don't evaluate, don't teach, don't moralize. Avoid carrying on a conversation with members sequentially, because that puts you in this spotlight, and you don't want to be in the spotlight. Now, what should you do? Do encourage members to express feelings, to explore problems, to share coping strategies. Help shift the focus of the group to issues that are of concern to all the group members. And basically keep this one principle in mind, which is that it is the members themselves that make support groups powerful and supportive experiences. Let me give you an example of a situation in which an open-ended approach to facilitation is most effective, and maybe that'll clarify this. Let's suppose Mary interrupts Kay during the group, and it's not a good intervention by her because Kay feels very cut off, and you can see that, but no one's talking about this in the group. So there's a problem with the process in the group. What you can say to Mary, instead of saying, Mary, please don't interrupt people in the group, that's rude, or some other kind of more directive intervention, you can say, you know, it seems like the group's confused about whether it's focusing on Mary or Kay at this time, or there are two issues here, or I'm not sure that she had time to finish responding to everything that we had brought up concerning her problem. So there's a less directive way to respond in this situation that can be more helpful. However, if in the group a really major conflict erupts, then it's appropriate for the facilitator to respond in a more directive and authoritative manner. In my own experiences in support groups and at the UCLA California Self-Help Center, we've identified some exercises that can make support groups work more effectively and prevent some of the very predictable problems that research has demonstrated occur in support groups. So I'd like to introduce these to you and show you a little bit of them in action so that you can experiment with them in your own support group. The idea here is that structure is important, and that some of these exercises you'll see give us control over the processes of the group, in the group, and enable us to prevent some of these predictable problems. The exercises I'd like to focus on are mood check, all for one, and the helper secrets exercise. Now, mood check is very simple. It's basically when we meet as a group, stopping for a moment and having each person in the group sequentially share what's on their heart, what's on their mind. We're all very busy. We need to make emotional contact and to know where each member of the group is at the beginning of a session.
Well, I'm kind of tired today after all the activity yesterday, but I feel real good about it. I'm still happy.
There have been 4 deaths over the weekend, and this kind of makes me feel helpless because these people were not on service for a long time and there was no relationship formed with the family or with the patient.
I just came back from a weekend at the beach and I feel a lot better. Things like that help me, and I'm ready to go see a patient.
I feel a little bit apprehensive, I think, because I have a new challenge this afternoon. It's with a teenager, and I've never done that before.
I had a very busy weekend, and quite honestly, I think I'm looking forward to the next vacation. Not quite ready to jump into a crisis situation right now.
I find myself looking over my schedule and seeing the enormity of people that I have to reach.
I feel real full and revitalized from a very hectic weekend. That was a challenge, and I feel I met the challenge, and so I'm ready to meet some more challenges.
Another exercise that I found is very helpful in the support group is called All for One. And essentially what it is that each member of the group is given a certain amount of time in which they are the focus of the entire group. So if we have, say, 90 minutes for our group and we have 10 members, we have about 9 minutes per group member. We might leave 10 minutes at the end of the group for discussion and give each person 7 minutes or 6 minutes to be the focus of the entire group's attention. And what this does is it cuts down on overtalk, it ensures participation by all members, and prevents monopolization. And there are a variety of ways to do this, but you can even structure the kinds of responses that group members make to the individual. So we would start, say, with the first member, and that person would have 7 minutes, and they would start talking, and then other members can be instructed to only respond with either Me Too disclosures, saying, yeah, I've experienced something like that, here's what my experience was, but then the focus going back to that individual. Or they might respond with empathy responses and just try to get the feeling that the individual is communicating. But what we're preventing here is the focus shifting to another group member and then another group member, and then that kind of chaos that can be very problematic. And we're also saying to each group member, you are important, what you have to say is crucial, and you get as much time as the other group members. And this is very nice. Even if you don't use it in every session, if you use it intermittently, say every other week, it really has a profound impact on the group's functioning.
The problem I would like to discuss with you today is a problem I have with finding that balance in my life that's so important in the caregiving ministry. I'm married and have 3 children. My wife and I both work. Our children go to Catholic schools. All that takes a great deal of time, financial resources, etc., which causes certain burdens on our family. And I find it difficult to find the proper balance in my life so that I can be an effective caregiver, meaning time for myself, for personal reflection, time for exercise, time for relaxation. And that's the problem that I'm facing.
What you're saying, Tim, I think, is that your family is very precious to you, and you really want to spend all that time you can. And I think I'm hearing that you're frustrated because you can't give them that time. And
That's certainly part of it.
appreciate
The demands of family and the need to be present to small children and to my wife, of course. That does weigh on me, yes.
That is a great concern. It's your primary commitment, really.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if I'm hearing, Tim, frustration, but more than frustration, some kind of a inadequacy, that you have a difficult time being all the things that you want to be.
Yes, I do feel inadequate often, trying to balance all these things.
Too much to do in too little time. I feel that way a lot. There's so much I want to do and so little time to do it in.
Sounds too like, you know, if you knew of a way to put more hours in the day that you would, because you want to do all this. You haven't figured out how to.
It's important to remember that sometimes having fun and being creative when we're talking about our problems can be the most helpful thing we can do with each other. One variation on the All for One exercise that I particularly like is an exercise in which each member of the group thinks about the primary problem that they're dealing with right now, and then think of an image or an inanimate object, a historical figure or a metaphor that captures the essence of the problem as they're experiencing it. And then each member of the group shares this with the other members.
I guess the image that comes to my mind is a squirrel in a circular cage running, and I oftentimes think the squirrel knows where he's headed, but looking from the outside, you're not quite so sure.
I thought of a merry-go-round because my problem consisted of communicating the same to one person and to another person in the merry-go-round, like the one in Santa Cruz. You touch every guy as you go, and you know, to communicate directly to every person that's involved.
Then each member of the group thinks about how would this image or metaphor or inanimate object change if my problem were to be solved? And then talking in terms of the metaphor or the image shares what this new picture would look like with other group members.
Maybe for me the image would be allowing the squirrel to go free from the cage to kind of go where he wants to go, and wherever that might be, whatever path that takes.
We'd have a smooth merry-go-round ride. I wouldn't have to, you know, worry about touching everybody along the way.
By sharing our imagery in the group, we get a lot closer to each other. We learn a little bit more about what it's really like inside other group members. Another way we can do this is to talk about some of the very much hidden experiences we have as helpers. And I'm talking here about a helper support group and the kinds of things we can do in that helper support group to really learn more about the experiences of other group members as helpers. I've studied what I call helper secrets for several years now. And what helper secrets are is that they are these inner experiences that we tend to keep inside us and to conceal from others because we think they say something bad about us. They are distressing feelings and experiences and self-perceptions, feelings of inadequacy, feelings of, geez, it's me, I'm not adequate, I'm not doing enough, I feel like I'm an imposter, or I've made a mistake, or I don't know what to do. And all of these different kinds of experiences kind of congeal inside, and they become helper secrets, and they corrode from within. And when they're shared in a supportive environment and disclosed, they can become part of our personal and professional growth. They're maintained by the fallacy of uniqueness, the belief that I'm the only one who's having problems with this. Everyone else seems to be dealing with this situation just fine, but I feel wiped out. I have difficult feelings. I don't feel comfortable. I'm not adequate. So there's this tendency toward self-blame and unrealistic expectations of self that causes problems. Let me read a few helper secrets that people have shared, and maybe you'll get a better idea from this. I'm terrified of going into a person's house for the first time. I'm afraid I don't have enough presence or personality to put them at ease, to facilitate an interaction with them, or to draw them out so they will talk. The other volunteers have these incredible emotional interactions with people, and I never seem to. So here you see that comparison with the other volunteers who were having incredible interactions all the time. And this person feels inadequate, and maybe I don't have what it takes, and all these self-doubts kick around inside. Sometimes I judge people I serve like leeches, wanting more and more of your time, not really trying to help themselves. And when you pull away from being involved with them, I feel judged, like I'm letting them down. I'm letting God down by not always wanting to give. It gives feelings of anger and sadness when these situations occur, yet I put on my mask and I smile. I am a new volunteer, writes another person, and I am anxious about dealing with the sight and odors of a dying person without acting offended. I would never want the person to feel rejected because of this. And another, I can't accept that there is no humanly possible way to constantly meet every need of every person I help, and to meet my spiritual needs, family needs, and health needs as well. After all, with God guiding my life, I should feel good about what I'm able to do, but it's never enough. Sometimes when a person's getting really bad and you can kind of foresee what's going to happen to them, I pray to God to please take them now before it gets worse. And finally, so many times I'm glad when someone has died. Maybe I've even prayed for him too. But I face the family members who are so sad or angry, and I hate having to hide what I really think. It feels like I'm betraying both sides, the patient and the family. I've done research looking at thousands of helper secrets, and what I found is that there are certain themes that repeat over and over again. And these have to do with experiences of anger. What does a caring person do when a caring person experiences anger? It's very difficult. Geez, I'm angry at the person I'm caring for. This is awful. I can't tell my colleagues about this because if they know, they'll think less of me. Feelings of inadequacy. Geez, I feel like an imposter. If anyone knew what I don't know, they wouldn't let me do what I'm doing. This is a very common experience, especially when you're dealing with these terrifically complex situations where it's not easy to have any idea what to say or do. And feelings of inadequacy happen very commonly. Also, feelings of guilt when we distance ourselves from the people we're caring for. Maybe not answering that phone call, or not getting in touch with someone soon enough, or not being there and not following through, and then feeling very guilty, like I'm not giving it my all, and feeling very sad about that. These are very common experiences. Now, how can we disclose these in a group context, given the distress disclosure dilemma, which is that helpers, like the people we're helping, have the same problem, which is how can I talk about this without having my self-esteem lowered and having other people be more critical of me? And the technique that we've developed is to have people write out their helper secrets on note cards, and then to have the cards distributed in the group. Once the cards are distributed, to ask, does anyone recognize what's written by virtue of the handwriting or any other little artifact? If they do recognize it, continue exchanging the cards. If not, keep the cards. It's okay if you have your own card in this exercise because no one else knows that you have your own card. Then we have the cards read sequentially. And for example, if I was reading the card, I would read it and pretend that I was the person who actually held the secret. So I would read the card, and then other members of the group would respond to me. And they would respond in only one way, with Me Too self-disclosures, experiences that show some empathy. If I say in my card, sometimes I've gotten very angry at the people I've cared for when they don't try to care for themselves. Someone in the group might share, you know, I've gotten frustrated with people for whatever reason, and talk about that. But no advice, no questions, nothing except disclosures which convey empathy. And we all have to dig deep in this exercise to share experiences that really show some connection with the secret that's being shared.
Often I have avoided a person who is dying because I did not know how to help or thought that my offer of help would not be wanted.
I avoided this one man that was dying because he was very offensive. and I didn't like what he said to me. And it was just terminology that I didn't like, so I found excuses not to visit him.
I found it difficult to work with an individual who was dying of cancer and didn't seem to go through the stages of grief that we've all learned about, and instead seemed to be in total acceptance and almost non-human about this whole thing, an acceptance to the point of almost saintlyhood. And I found it very difficult to minister because it didn't appear that he needed ministry.
Following the Helper Secrets exercise, it's often helpful to stop and reflect on what was it like to have my secret responded to by other people in the group, and what were some of the themes that we hear in our group. And that's a very useful discussion. Now, no matter how careful we are about how we're running our group and how we're responding to each other, there are some typical, predictable problems that happen in groups, and I'd like to mention these for you. There can be a monopolizer or a dominator. There can be a non-talker. There can be an angry aggressor who attacks other group members. There can be a rescuer who's constantly trying to solve everyone's problems. There can be an interrogator who's questioning people relentlessly. There can be lots of overtalk in which people begin talking before other people finish talking, and crosstalk where there is one person talking, then another person, then another person, then another person, and we never have sustained focus on one of the individuals in the group. And there can be violations of confidentiality, which is a very thorny issue, and when it occurs, it can rupture any trust that's developed in the group. The bottom line here is that groups need to attend to their process. When these kinds of problems begin to develop, the group has to have a mechanism whereby it starts to look at itself and say, hey, we're not doing so well in this area. Now, how can we do this? How can we evaluate ourselves as a group? One of the ways is to just give group members, very simply, a 4x6 index card and have each group member write out on it what was the best thing about this session, what was the worst thing about this session, and if you had a speaker, say you have an educational component in your group, to rate the speaker, or to write any other comments or suggestions. To do this anonymously, get the cards together, and then read them, and then discuss what this is telling us about our group, so it's a kind of feedback for the group. Also, you can whip around the group and have people speak for 1 or 2 minutes each about what's something they appreciate about the group, how do they see their own participation in the group, how do they feel about their role in the group. So then you get some more information about the group from group members. I think it's important that in a group we act proactively, that we start anticipating problems and we have these feedback mechanisms. We can't practice the Parmesan theory of management, which is we'll deal with no problem before it's time. Groups offer a unique opportunity for growth and for support. They're also very challenging, and we need to build in evaluation and other kinds of feedback mechanisms.